Well, as I said in my last video, this is the last 10 years later video that I am doing for 2020, and by extension, the last 2010 album that I'll be talking about in 10 years later. I want to point out again that this album was actually released in December of 2010, so this video is going up very early, but I'm doing that because December is going to be a bit of a busy month, so I kind of just want to have it filmed, done, and out of the way so that I could focus on the other things I have to focus on. Either way, as I said, welcome back to 10 years later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And as you can tell from the title, the album that we will be talking about today is the 2010 Michael Jackson posthumous compilation album, Michael. Michael Jackson. It should be obvious that he doesn't need an introduction here. The king of pop himself, Michael was one of the most legendary, popular, and acclaimed musical artists of all time. A man who has set records and broken barriers in the music industry, popularized several important dance moves, and created a lot of the most memorable music not just in the pop landscape, but in the medium in general. Michael has become the kind of artist where, despite there being a lot of controversy surrounding his name and personal life, true or not, he's withstood it all and his legacy has continued to endure. However, as many already know, Michael did not enter the 2010s with us, as in June of 2009, he passed away at the age of 50 as the result of a cardiac arrest suffered after being intoxicated by propofol and benzodiazepine. This came just months before Michael was set to embark on his This Is It tour, a 50-concert residency at Canada's O2 Arena, set to be the final performances of his career. It was a tragic moment when he passed, one that of course caused a massive outpouring of grief among pretty much the entirety of the world, but since the music industry is known to do this, it should come as no surprise that Michael's label wanted to continue putting his name on content in order to make an extra buck. In 2009 came the This Is It film, a documentary comprised of rehearsal footage from his tour that was supposedly never going to be released. And there was also a This Is It album that accompanied it, featuring several of MJ's greatest hits along with a few demos. A year after that came this record, a compilation of loose, unreleased, unfinished tracks pieced together in the hopes that, of course, they could turn a profit off of his name. Off the top, I will say that I really like the album cover. Kadir Nelson, who did the oil painting for this cover and would later create the album artwork for Drake's Nothing Was the Same, did a superb job and deserves to be commended for this. Otherwise, the album itself is 10 tracks in about 42 minutes, and it was pretty controversial upon release. Naturally, Michael considered himself a perfectionist and often didn't want things like this out in the open. The This Is It film was already controversial because it showed Michael not giving his full energy in the rehearsals, and many felt Michael would have protested the release of said footage. Same logic pretty much applies here. Michael's family and other artists in the industry believe that he would not have wanted these tracks to be released, especially given that he couldn't be here to put his stamp of approval on them. Maybe releasing posthumous music makes sense if it's a Mac Miller or Juice WRLD situation where the music was being worked on up to the artist's passing and feels finished. But in this case, none of it was really finished, and Michael was only really working on a select few tracks here prior to his death. I can't imagine that he would have felt comfortable with this getting out. Not only that, but there was a lot of controversy over rumors that several tracks on this project were not actually performed by Michael. Specifically, it was said that Breaking News, Keep Your Head Up, and Monster were actually sung by a sound-alike. Already, with the question of ethics surrounding its release, as well as the worries about the vocal authenticity, I feared for the worst involving this project. I can say that to my surprise, the record didn't turn out as bad as the ethics might have led me to believe, but it's only about as good as you would reasonably expect a posthumous collection of B-sides released without the artist's permission to be. As far as high points go, Hold My Hand, a track from 2008 featuring Akon, is actually a very nice song. It's a heavenly piece of R&B that at times can feel more Akon than Michael, but it works because the two of them match up so well vocally, and it's impressive that it actually feels like a proper completed piece. It's mellow, it's uplifting, and it works. Hollywood Tonight was a song Michael first started planning out in the days of Invincible before bringing back out in 2007. It's another song that surprisingly works, mostly in that it captures some of the punchy energy of some of Michael's hits from, say, the Dangerous era, and the vocal melodies are so snappy, immediate, and catchy that it's a worthy B-side. I Like The Way You Love Me is a reworked version of The Way You Love Me from Michael's 2004 Ultimate Collection box set. Supposedly, Michael wanted to rework this for several years for his This Is It tour, and I'm glad it did get reworked because it's such a sweet jam. It's got some very romantic lyrics, and I like how Michael's vocals fit so well up against the staccato pattern on the piano. It's a wonderful song, and while I can't help but feel like it would have been a better track had Michael actually been here to finish it himself, this is at least a nice compromise. Breaking News is one of the 2007 songs that was said to have used a sound-alike, and much like Monster, it's another track that deals with Michael standing with the media. I do get that vibe vibe that it's not really Michael in the song, especially if you listen to the verses. But oddly, I actually kind of like the track. Whether the vocals are Michael's or not, whoever's singing sounds nice. The slightly hip-hop flavored beat feels nicely reminiscent of a track like Blood on the Dance Floor, and the melodies on the hook are too damn catchy. Sure, we'll forever think about how it's probably not Michael, but regardless, the song itself is pretty decent. And Behind the Mask is actually a cover of a song originally made by Yellow Magic Orchestra that Michael originally recorded for Thriller but couldn't include for managerial reasons. It's a solid disco track that feels like it could have fit on any MJ album from Off the Wall onward, and it manages to capture a style that feels both retro and new at the same time, making for an easy highlight on the record. In fact, I'd probably say it's the best song on here. There are definitely some weak points on this thing, though I guess I'm not surprised given that it's essentially a B-sides album, and because Michael probably never wanted most of these tracks to be released. Keep Your Head Up is another track from 2007 that works like many of Michael's more uplifting songs. This was another one of the tracks that was said to be performed by a sound-alike, and if that's true, I mean, job well done, it mostly fooled me, but the sound-alike isn't my issue with the song. I think that it's a pretty smooth piece of R&B, but it doesn't really stand out, and I think the hook is very bland in comparison to something like Man in the Mirror. Monster is the last track from those 07 sessions that seem to have a sound-alike, and it also has a surprising feature from 50 Cent. Like I said about Breaking News, the song deals with Michael's status at the time as a victim of the media, and perhaps it's the processing, but I can definitely see how this song would be performed by a sound-alike. If it's not actually Michael, it's a good impression, but yeah, I definitely hear why people say it's not him. Beyond that, the song also feels like a weak attempt at recapturing the atmosphere of a track like Thriller, and 50's verse is pretty bland. It only helps turn this track into a total throwaway on the album. Best of Joy, it seems, was one of the last ones Michael was working on in his lifetime, having been written and recorded in 2009, and it's one of the rare ballads on the album. It's perfectly fine and Michael's vocals sound good, but it's another track that doesn't do a whole lot to stand out in comparison to some of his better ballads, like I Just Can't Stop Loving You. It sounds sweet, but can't help but feel like the B-side it is at certain points. I Can Make It Another Day is a track made during the Invincible era, and it also features the legendary Lenny Kravitz. This is a track that had unbelievable potential but doesn't deliver on it enough. I like the rock-leaning vibe of the track, and naturally, Michael fits into the sound perfectly, but I found myself wanting a bit more of Lenny on the track, and while Michael's ad-libbing is as awesome as ever, I feel like it could have used a slightly better chorus. And the album's closer, Much Too Soon, was another cut written during the Thriller era, though unlike Behind the Mask, this is a fully original MJ song and not a cover. It's another ballad that's a much different take for Michael with a more surprising folk-esque feel. It sounds nice and Michael's vocals are delicate, but it's another track where I can see why Michael cut it. It's sweet, but it feels like it would have been out of place on an album like Thriller. And when it comes to more ballad-driven songs, I'm glad MJ decided to end Thriller with The Lady in My Life and not Much Too Soon. Overall, I will say that this compilation certainly didn't need to exist. If we're focusing simply on the ethics and motivation behind its existence, this thing is a mess. Between the rumors of sound-alikes being used on songs, as well as the fact that Michael was such a perfectionist, I can't think he would have been too happy about this record coming to fruition. That said, despite the complete mess of a promo cycle that it had, it's not too bad. Michael himself was such a talented artist to the point where even on B-sides and tracks we might not have been meant to hear, he still sounded like he was ahead of the pack. His vocals were still as dynamic as ever, his production choices were consistently solid, and it was clear that even if Michael wasn't giving his 100% on every track, 60% of MJ was still pretty damn good. Again though, not every song has that feeling. It helps that a number of them may have been tainted by the fact that they could have used sound-alikes, and the collection as a whole can suffer from that. I guess the best way that I could sum it up is that given the controversies, it's not anywhere near as bad as you might be expecting, though that's really just thanks to the fact that Michael left behind some really good leftovers, and it's because he was such a great artist that this record doesn't completely crash and burn. Back in 2010, I wouldn't have been surprised if I ended up liking this thing just because I was so into Michael Jackson's music at the time. Listening to it now, I guess I can at least say that it's better than a lot of the ethics behind it might lead you to believe. If I had to put it on my scale, ignoring the controversies surrounding its existence as well as the sound-alike rumors, this album would probably get an okay rating from me. In many cases, I think Michael was such an incredible talent that even his B-side sounded great, but in the same way, I can see why he wanted to leave some of these tracks on the cutting room floor. But that's just my opinion on this record. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2010? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you love it now? Do you hate it now? What's your take on the controversies that surrounded it? What's your take on the controversies surrounding the This Is It movie that I mentioned earlier? Just give me your general thoughts. Let's have a conversation. Go ahead and tell me what you got to say down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And if you guys want to support my passion for content creation by subscribing to my OnlyFans where I create exclusive music review and poetry content for $4.99 a month, the link to that is in the description. 10. Again, it's no big deal if you can't or don't want to. I totally understand and I appreciate anyone that is able to. And as I said, that's my last 10 years later video for 2020. This is the last 2010 album that I'm going to be talking about for this series. And I'm kind of glad that that's out of the way because I think I need a bit of a 10 years later break right now. I will of course be back with more 10 years later videos in 2021, where of course we'll be diving into 2011 albums. I'm not gonna let you guys know what I'm starting off with right away. Not that it's the biggest 2011 album, but just like to leave you guys unsure of what to expect. Regardless, I do want to say thank you to everyone who supported this series and who checked out even as much as one video in 10 years later this year. I knew from the jump it was going to be a massive undertaking and the rest of the series is going to be a massive undertaking, but it was a lot of fun to get to experience albums from 2010 that I missed out on and even go back and listen to albums that I love. And I'm very excited to get to talk about some of 2011's albums because there are some great ones. So again, thank you guys so much for supporting this series. I can't wait to keep doing it in 2021. Of course, it will continue in January, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.